The afternoon sun hung low in the Atlanta sky, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood streets. It was one of those slow, peaceful Tuesdays. Kids were still in school, most folks were at work, and the only sounds were the hum of cicadas and the occasional car rolling past. Inside her modest but well-kept home, a woman in her late 60s double-checked her grocery list before heading out. She wore a soft lavender blouse, comfortable slacks, and her hair, long, thick locks, was neatly wrapped in a matching silk scarf. She'd been retired for nearly 5 years now. But old habits stuck. Posture straight, movements deliberate, eyes always aware of her surroundings. She climbed into her silver sedan, started the engine, and pulled gently onto the road. The car was clean, well-maintained, and ran smoothly, just like everything else in her life. She wasn't in a rush. She never was. After decades of high-stress command, of making split-second decisions that affected thousands of lives, she'd earned the right to take things slow. Today's mission was simple: pick up a few things from the market, milk, bread, some fresh greens, and maybe stop by the post office on the way back. As she turned onto Peachtree Street, she noticed a police cruiser slow down behind her. She didn't think much of it. Officers patrolled this area regularly. But then the lights flashed. Not the full siren, just the strobes, red and blue bouncing off storefront windows. Her heart gave a small, practiced thump, but she stayed calm. She signaled, eased to the curb, and came to a smooth stop. She placed both hands on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed but visible. She'd taught this maneuver to young recruits decades ago. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't reach. Don't move suddenly. She rolled down the window just enough to speak clearly. The officer who approached was young, maybe mid-20s, with a stiff gait and a hand resting near his belt. He didn't greet her. Didn't say afternoon or ma'am, just leaned in, squinting like he expected trouble. License and registration, he said, voice flat. She nodded. Of course, she replied, voice steady and polite. May I ask why I was stopped? Your taillight's out, he said, not looking at her car but at her face like he was trying to place her, or decide if she belonged. She glanced in her rearview mirror. Both taillights glowed red. She'd checked them just last week after replacing a bulb. Officer, I believe both lights are working, she said gently. Would you like to take a look? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back and called over his partner, a slightly older man with a heavier build and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his face. They exchanged a few quiet words, then the first officer turned back to her. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. She blinked. Am I under arrest? No, he said. But I need you to step out. She took a slow breath. She knew her rights. She also knew how quickly things could go wrong, especially for a black woman in her 60s who didn't look like what people expected. She'd seen it happen to others. She'd read the reports. She'd even testified about it once years ago, during a military review on civil-military relations. Still, she didn't want a scene. She just wanted to buy groceries. All right, she said calmly. I'll step out. She turned off the engine, opened the door slowly, and placed one foot on the pavement. As she rose, her scarf shifted slightly, and a few strands of her locks slipped free, catching on the edge of the door frame. She paused to tuck them back, but before she could, the younger officer grabbed her arm. Hard. Don't touch the car, he barked. I'm not, she said, keeping her voice low. My hair got caught, but he wasn't listening. He yanked her forward, and in that sudden motion, her locks, thick, strong, part of who she was, snagged tighter. Instead of letting go or helping her free them, he pulled again, this time backward and down. The pain shot through her scalp like fire. She gasped, stumbling, her knees hitting the hot asphalt. Her hands flew up instinctively, not to fight, but to protect her head. But the officer twisted her arm behind her back anyway. Bystanders on the sidewalk froze. A woman walking her dog stopped mid-step. A teenager on a bike slowed, eyes wide. Get on the ground, the officer shouted, voice sharp with panic or anger. I'm on the ground, she said through gritted teeth, trying to keep her voice level. You dragged me down. Shut up. The other officer snapped, stepping closer. You think you can lie your way out of this? You think we don't know your type? Her stomach dropped. Your type. She'd heard that phrase before, in boot camp, in war zones, even in Pentagon hallways. Always coded. Always cruel. I'm a retired U.S. Army general, she said clearly, looking up at them both. My ID is in my wallet. Please let me show it to you. The younger officer laughed, a short, bitter sound. Yeah, right. And I'm the president. He didn't reach for her wallet. Didn't ask for proof. Instead, he tightened the cuffs around her wrists, too tight, cutting into her skin, and yanked her to her feet. She winced but didn't cry out. Crying out wouldn't help. It never did. People were filming now. Phones raised, voices murmuring. Someone shouted, "Leave her alone!" But the officers ignored them. One patted her down roughly, hands moving over her blouse, her waist, her legs. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the horizon, jaw clenched. Inside she was screaming. But outside she was stone. This wasn't just about a broken taillight. This wasn't even about suspicion. This was about power. About who gets to be believed, who gets to be respected, and who gets dragged by their hair like they're nothing. She thought of her grandchildren, how she'd taught them to stand tall, to speak clearly, to never let anyone make them feel small. And here she was on her knees in the street, treated like a threat just for existing. The older officer finally pulled her wallet from her purse. He flipped it open, glanced at her license, then scoffed. Evelyn Thompson. Yeah, that's real helpful. He didn't see the military ID tucked behind the license, or maybe he chose not to look. They shoved her into the back of the cruiser, the door slamming shut with a hollow thud. The air inside was hot, stale. She sat there, wrists burning, scalp throbbing, watching the world through tinted glass. A little girl across the street stared at her, eyes wide with confusion. The woman wanted to smile, to reassure her. It's okay, baby, I'm okay, but she couldn't even lift her hands. At the station, they processed her quickly. No charges. No apology. Just a curt, "You're free to go," after an hour of sitting in a cold holding room. She walked out into the fading light, her car waiting in the impound lot. She drove home in silence, hands trembling only slightly on the wheel. That night, she didn't cry. She washed her face, applied a cool compress to her scalp, and sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "It's me," she said when the voice answered. Something happened today. She told the story plainly, no drama, no exaggeration, just facts. But the person on the other end knew what those facts meant, knew what it cost her to say them out loud. By morning, the video was everywhere, shot by a college student on his way to class, uploaded with a simple caption, "They dragged her by her hair." She's a general. The internet erupted. Veterans groups, civil rights leaders, even former colleagues from the Joint Chiefs began speaking out. News vans gathered outside her quiet street. But she didn't give interviews, not yet. She let the truth spread on its own. Because the truth was this. She'd spent her life serving a country that still didn't see her as fully human. And maybe that wouldn't change overnight. But she wasn't going to disappear. Not now. Not ever. She looked in the mirror the next morning, unwrapped her scarf, and gently touched the sore spot on her scalp. Her locks were tangled, a few strands broken, but they were still there. Strong, rooted, hers. And so was she. The pavement burned through her slacks as she knelt on the street, wrists locked behind her back in cuffs that bit too deep. Her scalp still throbbed where her locks had been yanked, sharp, stinging pain that pulsed with every heartbeat. Around her, the neighborhood had gone quiet except for the low murmur of voices and the soft clicks of phones recording. She kept her eyes forward, not out of pride, but because looking down felt like surrender, and she'd long ago promised herself she'd never surrender to fear. One of the officers paced nearby, barking into his radio while the other stood over her like a guard. "Stay still," he snapped, though she hadn't moved an inch. She could feel the weight of his stare, heavy with suspicion, like she might vanish or attack if he blinked. A woman from across the street stepped closer, holding a phone out but not pointing it directly. "You okay, ma'am?" she asked, voice soft but firm. Before she could answer, the younger officer whirled around. "Back up, this is an active scene." The woman didn't retreat. "She's an elder. You got no right dragging her like that." "Ma'am, I will arrest you too if you interfere," he warned, hand hovering near his belt again. But the woman didn't flinch. Neither did the others now gathering on the sidewalk. Neighbors, a delivery driver, a teenager with earbuds dangling around his neck. They weren't shouting. They weren't threatening. They were just watching, bearing witness. And in that moment, their silence spoke louder than any protest. She wanted to tell them it was all right. that she'd been through worse in sandstorms and firefights in rooms where men twice her size tried to talk over her like she wasn't there. But this felt different. Not because it was more dangerous, but because it was so ordinary, so casual. Like disrespect was just part of the air she breathed now, even in retirement, even in her own city. She cleared her throat. "I'm a retired general," she said again, voice calm but carrying. "4-star, U.S. Army. My ID is in my wallet. Please check it." The older officer, the one with the permanent scowl, snorted. "Right, and I'm General Patton." He flipped open her wallet, glanced at her driver's license, then tossed it onto the car seat like it was trash. He didn't look at the military ID tucked behind it. Maybe he didn't recognize the seal. Maybe he didn't care. "You fit the description," he muttered, though he never said what description he meant. She didn't argue. Arguing wouldn't help. She'd learned that long ago, not just in the military but in life. Sometimes the only power you have is your stillness, your dignity. So she sat there, back straight, breathing slow, letting the heat of the sun and the sting in her scalp remind her she was still alive, still here. After what felt like forever, they finally uncuffed her, just enough to shove her into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut, and the world outside turned muffled, distant. She watched through the window as they searched her car, opening the glove compartment, lifting the trunk, even checking under the seats. They found nothing, of course. Just a spare tire, a first aid kit, and a grocery list folded neatly in the console. At the station, they took her fingerprints, snapped a photo, and made her sit in a cold, windowless room with a metal bench and flickering fluorescent light. No water, no explanation. Just waiting. She used the time to steady herself. To remember who she was, not just what they saw. She thought about her first day in officer training decades ago. How the drill sergeant had looked her up and down and said, "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" She'd stood tall and said, "Yes, sir, and I'll be here long after you've retired." He'd laughed then, but she'd been right. Now sitting in this holding room, she felt that same fire, not hot and angry, but deep and steady, like a pilot light that never went out. An hour later, a different officer, a woman, older, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Lieutenant Diaz, walked in. She didn't carry herself like the others. No swagger, no suspicion, just quiet professionalism, "Ma'am," she said. "There's been a mistake. You're free to go." "No charges?" she asked. "No, ma'am. The taillight checks out. Dash cam shows it was working. We're reviewing the stop," she nodded. "And the use of force?" Lieutenant Diaz hesitated. "That's under internal review, too." She didn't push. She knew how these things went. "Thank you," she said simply. They returned her belongings, wallet, keys, scarf. Her locks were still loose, tangled from the struggle. She carefully rewrapped them in the silk scarf in the station bathroom, hands moving with practiced care. In the mirror, she saw the red marks on her wrists, the slight swelling near her hairline. She took a deep breath. Then she walked out. Her car was waiting in the impound lot. She drove home slowly, windows down, letting the evening air cool her skin. The streets were quieter now. Streetlights flickered on one by one. She passed families on porches, kids chasing fireflies, the smell of dinner cooking in open windows. Normal life. Peaceful life. A life she'd fought for, both overseas and right here at home. At home, she made tea, sat on her porch swing, and called her oldest granddaughter. Not to complain, just to hear her voice. "Hey, baby," she said when the girl answered, just checking in. "How's school?" They talked about homework, a school play, a new puppy, normal things, beautiful things, and for a while the weight on her chest lifted. But later, alone again, she opened her laptop. She hadn't planned to, but curiosity or maybe instinct pulled her. She typed her address and police into the search bar. The video was already there, shot from a phone, shaky but clear. It showed her stepping out of the car the moment her hair caught, the yank, the fall. The comments were pouring in, some angry, some supportive, some full of disbelief. "That's a general," one read. "Look up General Evelyn Thompson. First black woman 4-star. They dragged a national treasure by her hair." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't wanted this. Not the attention, not the spectacle. But she also knew silence wouldn't fix this. Not for her. Not for the next woman who looked like her, who drove a nice car, who dared to ask, "Why am I being stopped?" She closed the laptop, went to bed, slept fitfully. The next morning, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations. Old colleagues. A lawyer from a civil rights group she'd once spoken with at a conference. She let most go to voicemail. But one call she answered, from a former aide now working as a liaison at the Pentagon. "It's all over D.C., he said, voice tight with concern. "People are furious. They want you to speak." "I don't know," she said. "I just wanted to buy groceries." "I know," he replied. "But this isn't just about you anymore." She sat at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the blinds. On the counter sat a framed photo from her retirement ceremony. Her in full uniform, medals gleaming, surrounded by soldiers who'd served under her command. Men and women of all races, all backgrounds, standing tall because she'd taught them how. She thought about those soldiers. About the young black girl on the sidewalk who'd watched her get dragged to the ground. What did that child think now? That even someone with stars on their shoulders wasn't safe? That's when she made her decision. She called the civil rights lawyer back. "Let's talk," she said. Then she reached out to a local reporter she trusted. Not for a big interview, but for a simple statement. "I served this country for over 30 years. Yesterday I was treated like a criminal for no reason. I hope this leads to change, not just for me, but for everyone who looks like me." By noon, her military record was circulating online. Not just her rank, but her service history. Deployments in Kosovo, Afghanistan, humanitarian missions in Haiti, leadership roles that shaped military policy for a generation. Veterans groups posted side-by-side photos, her in uniform, then on the ground in handcuffs with the caption, "This is who they disrespected." The police department issued a vague statement. The incident is under review. But the public wasn't satisfied. Protests formed outside the precinct, not violent, not destructive. Just people holding signs that read, "Respect her rank and honor her service." She watched it all from her living room, heart heavy but resolute. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but if it could shine a light on something broken, then maybe it was worth the pain. That evening she walked to the corner store, just a short trip but a statement in itself. The clerk, an older man who'd known her for years, nodded when she entered. "Heard what happened," he said quietly. "You all right?" She smiled. "I'm still standing." He handed her a bottle of water. On the house, as she walked back home, neighbors waved. Some stopped to say they were sorry. Others just gave a look that said, "We see you. We believe you." And for the first time since the stop, she felt less alone. Later, she sat on her porch again, this time with a notebook. She began to write, not a speech, not a complaint, but a letter. To the chief of police, to the mayor, to the young officers who might one day face a choice, to see a person or to see a stereotype. She wrote about duty, about honor, about how true strength isn't in force but in restraint. In respect, she didn't know if they'd read it. But she had to try, because the woman they dragged by her locks wasn't just a victim. She was a leader, a teacher, a grandmother. And she wasn't going to let this moment define her. She was going to redefine it. The night deepened. Crickets sang. Somewhere down the street a child laughed and she sat there, wrapped in her scarf, locked safe beneath the silk, heart bruised but unbroken, ready for whatever came next. The morning after the video went viral, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't just reporters anymore. It was former generals, senators, even a few quiet calls from people still serving in uniform who didn't dare speak publicly, but wanted her to know they stood with her. She answered only a few, mostly to thank them, but kept her voice low, her words measured. She wasn't looking for a spotlight. But she also knew silence now would send the wrong message. By midday, her military file, once buried in Pentagon archives, was everywhere. Not just online, but on news tickers, in morning talk shows, even on the evening news broadcast. They showed photos of her in full dress uniform, gold stars gleaming on her shoulders, standing beside presidents and foreign leaders. Then they cut to the grainy cell phone footage, her on her knees, locks tangled, hands cuffed behind her back. The contrast was jarring, impossible to ignore. The police department, which had been slow to respond, suddenly scrambled. A press release dropped by noon. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. It sounded official, but it lacked heart. No apology. No acknowledgement of what really happened. Just procedure. She read it over coffee, lips pressed thin. She'd seen this dance before, in war rooms, in boardrooms, in places where powerful people tried to smooth things over with paperwork while real pain went unaddressed. But this time, the public wasn't buying it. Outside the precinct, a small but steady group gathered every day. Not shouting, not breaking anything, just standing, holding. Signs that read "Stars don't lie" and "Her hair is not a handle." Some wore military caps, others wore church hats. A few were teenagers holding printed photos of her in uniform with the words, "Protect Black Women" written beneath. Then came the body cam footage. At first, the department refused to release it, citing ongoing investigation. But a local news station filed a public records request, and a judge ordered its release within 48 hours. When it finally dropped online, the truth was even worse than the bystander video suggested. The audio was clear. As she tried to explain her hair was caught, the younger officer muttered, "Shut up, old lady. You think we scared of you?" And when she said she was a general, the older one laughed and said, "Yeah, and I'm Beyoncé. Save the act." The moment those words hit the airwaves, everything changed. Veterans organizations issued joint statements. The NACP called for immediate disciplinary action. Even the local police union, usually quick to defend its own, released a cautious note saying, "The conduct shown does not reflect the values of our department." But the real turning point came when a retired admiral, white, in his 80s, a legend from the Gulf War, appeared on national television. He didn't just condemn the officers. He said plainly, "I served with General Thompson in 2003. She saved my life during a supply convoy ambush in Iraq. If you disrespect her, you disrespect every American who's ever worn a uniform." That quote went viral, shared by soldiers, teachers, nurses, even high school students. Suddenly, this wasn't just about race or policing. It was about honor, about who we choose to protect and who we allow to be humiliated. She watched that interview from her living room, wrapped in a soft shawl, a cup of ginger tea warming her hands. Her eyes stung, but not from pain, from gratitude, from the weight of being seen, not as a symbol, but as a person who'd given everything and still believed in the country that failed her. Later that week, a courier arrived at her door with a thick manila envelope. No return address, just her name in neat block letters. Inside was a printed copy of her full service record, 34 years, 4 combat zones, 2 Bronze Stars, a Legion of Merit, and the historic promotion to 4-star general in 2012, making her the first Black woman to reach that rank in U.S. Army history. Someone had highlighted key passages in yellow marker, like they wanted to make sure no one missed them. Tucked in the back was a handwritten note. "They tried to erase you. We won't let them." She folded the note carefully and placed it in her keepsake box, the one that held her father's dog tags, her mother's wedding ring, and the first letter she ever received from a soldier she'd mentored. That same afternoon, she got a call from Washington. Not the White House, but a congressional office. A subcommittee on civil rights and law enforcement wanted her to testify. Not as a victim, they emphasized, but as an expert. As a leader who understood both military discipline and the cost of unchecked power. She almost said no. Public speaking had never been her thing. She preferred action over words, strategy over speeches. But then she thought of the little girl on the sidewalk, the one who'd watched her get dragged to the ground. What would that child believe about justice if no one stood up? So she said yes. In the days leading up to the hearing, she didn't rehearse dramatic lines. She simply gathered her truth. She pulled out old mission reports, letters from troops she'd commanded, even her own journal entries from tough days overseas. She wanted to speak not from anger but from experience, from love of country even when that country fell short. The night before she flew to D.C., she sat on her porch again. The neighborhood was quiet but different now. People waved with more warmth. Kids said ma'am when they passed. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Earned, not given. She thought about her Locs, how they'd been used as a weapon against her, how something so personal, so tied to her identity, had been treated like a rope to pull her down. But now strangers were posting photos of their own Locs with captions like "Wear them proud" and "My hair, my dignity." A local salon even started a fundraiser called Locs of Honor, donating proceeds to youth leadership programs. She smiled at that. Pain had sparked something beautiful, not because she wanted it to, but because people chose to rise with her. In Washington, the hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters scribbled notes. Lawmakers sat in high-backed chairs, some looking nervous, others curious. When she walked in, wearing a simple navy suit, her locks wrapped in a deep blue scarf, no uniform, no medals, there was a hush. She didn't need the stars on her shoulders to command the room. She'd earned that long ago. She spoke for 20 minutes. No theatrics, no shouting. Just clear, calm words. "I didn't join the army to be famous," she began. "I joined because I believed in service, in protecting people, even those who don't look like me, who don't agree with me. That's what duty means." She described the stop, not with bitterness, but with precision. The way the officers ignored her ID, dismissed her rank, used force without cause. Then she shifted. "But this isn't just about me," she said, voice steady. "It's about the young black girl walking home from school, the elderly man driving to church, the veteran in a wheelchair who gets followed in a store. When we allow bias to guide who gets respect and who gets suspicion, we break the promise of this country." She paused, looked directly into the cameras. "I served in war zones where I couldn't trust the ground beneath my feet. But I never thought I'd feel unsafe on my own street, wearing a blouse, running errands, just trying to live my life in peace." When she finished, the room was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then one by one, lawmakers stood. Not all of them, but enough. And outside the chamber, the video of her testimony spread faster than any press release ever could. Back home, her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from strangers. "Thank you. You gave me courage. My daughter wants to be a general now." She read them all, save the ones that made her cry. A few days later, the police chief called her personally, not through a spokesperson, not with a script. Just a man sounding tired and ashamed saying, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. What happened was wrong. It won't happen again, not on my watch." She didn't forgive him on the spot. Forgiveness wasn't hers to give lightly, but she appreciated the call. The humility. That was a start. Then came the real change. The city announced new policies, mandatory de-escalation training, stricter rules on use of force, and, most importantly, a requirement that officers verify identity before making assumptions. They also launched a community review board with civilian oversight and invited her to serve as an advisor. She agreed, but only if young people were included. "If we're fixing the future," she told them, "they need a seat at the table." Meanwhile, the two officers faced disciplinary hearings. The younger one resigned before the process finished. The older one was fired after Internal Affairs confirmed he'd used racial slurs and falsified the reason for the stop. No criminal charges, just administrative consequences. It wasn't justice in the fullest sense, but it was accountability. And in a system that rarely held its own to account, that mattered. She didn't celebrate. But she felt a quiet relief. Like a storm had passed and the air was finally clear. One evening, she received a package from a high school in Georgia. Inside was a handmade quilt, stitched by students in a history class. Each square showed a moment from her life. Boot camp, a field hospital in Afghanistan, her promotion ceremony, and, yes, even the day of the stop. But drawn with her standing tall, locks flowing, light shining behind her, attached was a letter. "You taught us that dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. We won't surrender." She hung the quilt on her wall, right across from her medals. And for the first time since that Tuesday afternoon, she slept through the night. No nightmares, no replaying the pain. Just peace, because the truth had come out. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but it had come out. And once truth is seen, it can't be unseen. She didn't want to become a symbol. She never asked for marches, hashtags, or headlines with her face on them, but life had a way of pulling quiet people into the center when the moment demanded it. And this moment, this raw, painful, necessary moment, needed her voice. After her testimony in Washington, offers poured in, talk shows, book deals, speaking tours. She turned most of them down, not out of pride, but because she knew real change didn't happen on TV screens. It happened in classrooms, community centers, and the quiet conversations between neighbors. So instead of chasing fame, she started showing up. Her first stop was a youth center in Atlanta's West End. She didn't arrive in a limo or with security, just her car, her scarf, and a folder full of notes. The kids were skeptical at first. Teenagers always are, especially when an older woman walks in talking about service and discipline. But then she sat down on a folding chair, looked them in the eye and said, "I got dragged by my hair last month. You probably saw it online." That got their attention. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told them how scared she'd been, how angry, how humiliated. But then she told them what she did after. "I chose to speak up, not just for me, but for you. Because if they'll do that to a 4-star general, what do you think they'll do to you if you don't know your rights?" One young girl raised her hand. "Did you ever want to just give up?" She smiled softly. "Every day. But giving up means letting them win. And I didn't survive war zones to lose on my own street." That day, something shifted. The kids didn't just listen, they leaned in. They asked questions about the military, about leadership, about how to stay calm when the world treats you like you're nothing. She answered honestly, without jargon, without pretending she had all the answers. And by the end, a few of them asked if she'd come back next week. She did. Word spread. Soon, schools, churches, and community groups were inviting her, not as a celebrity, but as a mentor. She started a small program she called Operation Dignity. No fancy funding, no big logo, just weekly meetings where young people, especially black girls, learned how to carry themselves with confidence, how to document police encounters safely, how to write letters to city officials, how to lead without shouting. She taught them that leadership wasn't about titles. It was about showing up, speaking truth, and lifting others as you climb. At the same time, she kept pushing for systemic change. She met with city leaders, not in suits and ties, but over coffee at a local diner, where she spoke plainly. Training won't fix everything if the culture doesn't change. You can't teach respect in a classroom if it's not modeled on the streets. Her presence alone changed the tone of those meetings. Before, discussions about policing often felt abstract, charts, statistics, policy drafts. But now when someone said, "We need to reduce use of force incidents," others would glance at her, remembering the video, the Locs, the silence on the pavement. She made the data human. She also worked quietly behind the scenes with veteran organizations to create a new initiative. Guardians, not warriors. The idea was simple. Retrain officers using principles from military leadership. De-escalation, situational awareness, and above all, seeing civilians as people to protect, not threats to control. Several police departments in neighboring counties signed on as pilot programs, but her real passion remained with the young. One Saturday morning, she hosted a leadership workshop at a community garden. 20 girls ages 12 to 18 sat on hay bales under a wide oak tree. She didn't lecture. Instead, she handed each of them a small potted plant. "This is yours," she said. "Your job is to care for it every day. Water it, talk to it, watch it grow. Leadership is like that. It's daily. It's quiet. It's showing up even when no one's watching." A shy girl in the back whispered, "What if I mess up?" "You will," she said, smiling. "I've made plenty of mistakes, but a plant doesn't die from one dry day, and neither do you. Just keep coming back later." As they planted vegetables together, tomatoes, peppers, collard greens, she told them about growing up in the segregated South, how her grandmother taught her to hold her head high even when store clerks refused to serve her. "Dignity," she said, patting soil around a seedling, "is something you carry inside. No one can take it unless you hand it over." The girls listened, and more importantly, they believed her, because she wasn't just telling them what to do. She was living it. Back home, she started getting letters, not just from strangers, but from officers. One young cop, fresh out of the academy, wrote, "I watched your testimony 3 times. I used to think bias was something other people had. Now I see I have to check myself every day. Thank you for helping me be better." She kept that letter on her fridge. She also began visiting police training academies, not as a critic, but as a guest instructor. She didn't shame the recruits. Instead, she shared stories of leading troops in chaos, of making split-second decisions under fire, of the weight of knowing your actions could save or end a life. "You have that same power," she told them. "Use it wisely," some recruits cried. Others asked hard questions. A few admitted they'd never thought about how a simple traffic stop could feel like a threat to someone who's been profiled before. She didn't have all the answers, but she created space for honesty, and that was where healing began. Meanwhile, the city moved forward with its reforms. Body cams became mandatory. Supervisors had to review every use of force report within 24 hours. And for the first time, community members, teachers, pastors, youth leaders were invited to help design the new training curriculum. She insisted that part of that training include a session on cultural respect, especially around hair. Locs braids afros, they're not unprofessional, she told the committee. Their heritage, their identity. Yanking someone by their hair isn't just force, it's dehumanization. Her words led to a new policy. Officers were now trained to recognize natural, black hairstyles and instructed never to touch a person's hair without explicit medical or safety reason, and even then, only with consent. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was progress. One evening she received an unexpected visitor, the woman who'd filmed the original video, the college student who'd been walking to class that day. She'd graduated now and brought a thank you card. Because of you, she said, I'm studying law. I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. They sat on the porch sipping sweet tea, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. The student asked, Do you ever regret speaking out? She thought for a long moment. No, she said finally, because silence protects the system. And I've spent my whole life trying to make systems better, not just for me, but for the next person coming through. She also started writing, not a memoir, but a series of short reflections she shared online, simple pieces with titles like What My Locs Taught Me About Resilience or Leadership Begins with Listening. People read them, shared them, even printed them for school projects. A local library asked if they could name their new teen leadership room after her. She agreed, but only if they called it the Dignity Room, not after her name. Let it be about the value, she said, not the person. As the months passed, the outrage faded from the headlines, but the work continued. She knew real change wasn't measured in viral moments, but in small, steady actions. A teacher using her story in a lesson on civil rights, a cop pausing before reaching for his cuffs, a girl wearing her locks to school without fear. One rainy afternoon, she got a call from the Pentagon. They wanted to honor her, not with another medal, but by including her story in the official leadership training for all new officers. You've shown what moral courage looks like, the caller said. We want every soldier to learn from it. She accepted, but with one request. Include the part where I was scared, where I doubted. Because leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're afraid. That night, she sat at her kitchen table looking at photos from the past year, her with students, at city council meetings, planting trees with kids, even shaking hands with a reformed officer who'd once believed the worst of people like her. She wasn't the same woman who'd been dragged onto that street. She was softer in some places, stronger in others. Wiser, certainly. She picked up her journal and wrote, They tried to break me that day, but instead they helped me find my next mission, because she realized something important. Her uniform may have been retired, but her service wasn't over. In fact, it had just entered a new chapter, one not of commands and combat, but of connection and care. And that, she thought as she closed the journal and turned off the lamp, was the most powerful kind of leadership of all. Time has a way of softening edges. The sharp sting of that afternoon, the yank on her locks, the cold pavement, the disbelief in the officer's eyes, hadn't disappeared, but it had settled. Not as a wound, but as a lesson. And like all good lessons, it kept teaching. A year after the incident, the city finalized its settlement. It wasn't about the money. She'd made that clear from the start. But when the check arrived, she didn't deposit it into her own account. Instead, she walked into a small community bank and opened a new one, the Evelyn Thompson Legacy Fund. Every dollar went toward scholarships for young black women pursuing careers in public service. Police academy cadets, social workers, city planners, teachers. If I can help one girl walk into a room and be seen for her mind, not her hair, she told the bank manager, then this was worth it. The first scholarship recipient was a quiet high school senior who'd written an essay about watching the video of the stop and realizing, for the first time, that even the most accomplished black women weren't safe from disrespect. I want to be a police officer, she wrote, so I can be the kind of officer that they needed. When they met, the young woman's hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. That's when she knew the money was going exactly where it belonged. The two officers involved never faced criminal charges, just as she'd expected. The system rarely punishes its own that way, but one lost his job entirely. The other left the force quietly, vanishing from public view. She didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no joy in it. But she did feel a quiet sense of balance restored. Accountability, even if imperfect, mattered. It sent a message. Actions have consequences even when the person harmed wears stars on their shoulders. More importantly, the department changed. Not overnight and not completely, but enough. New recruits now trained with scenarios that included implicit bias drills. Supervisors reviewed every traffic stop involving elderly or disabled citizens. And the policy about touching someone's hair? It became standard across 3 counties. Officers who violated it faced immediate retraining, and in one case, suspension. She was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for the newest police academy class. She didn't wear her uniform, just a simple dress and her locks wrapped in a deep green scarf, the color of growth. She stood at the podium and looked out at rows of young faces, some nervous, some eager, all carrying the weight of a badge they hadn't yet earned. "I'm not here to tell you how to do your job," she began. "I'm here to remind you why it matters. Every time you pull someone over, you're not just enforcing a law, you're representing a promise. The promise that this country treats everyone with fairness, with dignity, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I've led soldiers into combat. I've made decisions that cost lives. But nothing prepared me for the moment I was treated like a threat just for being me. Don't let that be someone else's story on your watch." Afterward, more than half the class came up to shake her hand. One young woman, black with braids pinned neatly under her cap, whispered, "Thank you for making space for people like me." She squeezed the recruit's hand and said, "Now go make space for others." Back home, life returned to a gentler rhythm. She still gardened, still made tea on the porch, still checked in on her grandchildren. But something had shifted in the neighborhood, too. Kids waved not just out of politeness, but with a kind of quiet pride, like they were part of something bigger. Local businesses hung small signs in their windows. Respect always. Not because of a law, but because they'd seen what happened when respect was missing. Her story had become part of the community's heartbeat. She started getting invited to military academies, not just to speak, but to sit in on leadership seminars. At West Point, a cadet asked, "How do you stay calm when people doubt you?" She smiled. "You don't always, but you remember your why." My why was never just about rank. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to fight the same battles. She also began working with a group of retired generals and admirals, men and women from all backgrounds, who'd formed a coalition to advise cities on community policing. They called themselves the Honor Guard, not for ceremony but for commitment. Together, they helped redesign training programs that focused less on force and more on humanity. But her favorite moments were still the small ones. Like the day a mother brought her 8-year-old daughter to her door. The girl held a drawing, a crayon portrait of a woman with locks and 4 gold stars, standing tall while people cheered. "She wants to be like you," the mother said, eyes shining. Or the afternoon she visited a middle school and found a classroom wall covered in student essays titled, "What Dignity Means to Me." One read, "Dignity is not letting someone make you feel small even when they try." She cried that day. Not from sadness, but from hope. Her locks, once used as a handle to pull her down, had become something else entirely. Teenagers posted photos of their own locks with captions like "Wear your crown" and "My hair, my history." A local artist painted a mural on the side of a community center, her in profile, locks flowing like a river with the words "She rose" beneath. She never asked for it, but when she saw it, she stood there for a long time, hand over her heart. She'd been asked many times if she regretted the day she was stopped. Her answer never changed. "I don't regret what happened. I regret that it had to happen for people to finally listen." But she also believed in redemption, not just for herself, but for the system, for the country. She'd seen too much good in people to give up on them. One spring morning, she received a package from a school in rural Georgia. Inside was a handmade book titled "Lessons from a Leader," filled with stories, poems, and drawings from 5th graders who'd studied her life. On the last page, in careful handwriting, one child had written, "You taught us that your hair is not your weakness. It's your strength. And so are you." She read it 3 times. Then she framed it and hung it next to the quilt the high school students had made. As the years passed, she slowed down, not from age, but from choice. She still mentored, still advised, but she also made time to sit in silence, to watch the birds at her feeder, to enjoy the simple joy of a warm biscuit and honey. She never sought fame. But in the end, she became something more valuable, a living example. Not of perfection, but of perseverance, of grace under pressure, of turning pain into purpose. At a national veterans gathering, someone asked how she wanted to be remembered. She thought for a moment, then said, "Not as a general, not as a victim, just as someone who never stopped believing that this country could be better, and who did her part to help it get there." And that, more than any medal or title, was her true legacy. Today, if you walk through certain neighborhoods in Atlanta, you might see a young girl with locks walking confidently to school, head high, backpack bouncing. You might hear a teacher say, "Remember what General Thompson taught us, dignity starts with how you treat others." You might even see a police officer pause during a stop, take a breath, and say "ma'am" with real respect. That's how change happens. Not in headlines, but in habits. Not in one grand moment, but in 1,000 small choices. She sits on her porch now, older, wiser, still wrapped in silk, still rooted in truth. The sun sets gently, the air smells like jasmine, and somewhere a child looks up at the stars, not the ones on a uniform, but the ones in the sky, and dreams of leading with kindness, courage, and unshakable dignity, because she showed them it was possible. And that's a story that will never end.